Welcome to our LVMH Prize panel. We're going to be unpicking all that is LVMH Prize, really diving into the process and everything that kind of goes into the amazing judges, the prizes, the panellists, everything. So before we kind of dive into this behemoth topic, I'm going to let the panellists introduce themselves. If we start with you, Susie, and work our way around.
I'm Susie Lau. I'm a fashion writer and a blogger person, hybrid.
I'm Sophie Brocart. I'm actually in charge of the mentoring of the LVMH Prize, and I'm also the CEO of Patou.
I'm Gilhart, and I'm a fashion consultant.
I'm Fabio Piras, and I'm the course director of MA Fashion at Central St. Martin's.
And I'm SHOWstudio fashion editor Georgina Evans. So to start with, I kind of want to unpick a little bit our relationship with LVMH. Obviously, Sophie, in the introduction, you've got a very unique and interesting relationship with LVMH. So can you tell us a little, the prize, tell us a little bit about that and how that started.
How the prize started?
How you started with the prize.
Okay, well, I was hired actually partly to work on the prize, to help set it up, and to be the mentor of the LVMH Prize. So since 2013, when I arrived at LVMH, I started working on it. I mean, besides other functions I worked on with LVMH, but that was part of my mission. And since 2014, I've been mentoring more than 10 designers, the winners of the LVMH Prize.
And Fabio, is it something you spotlight in students from the beginning? Is it something that you kind of push for students to have in the forefront of their mind, the LVMH Prize? What's your relationship with it?
Well, we don't really push them per se, but I mean, it's obviously some, well, first of all, the LVMH Prize also has a graduate section. So that, of course, then in our case, we encourage students graduates to apply to the graduate prize, because I mean, again, it's about giving them access to a world of connections, because that's, to me, that's what it is, very much so. So then obviously, I mean, it is something that students really look at as a huge opportunity. For employment. It's a way to get their foot in the door in a world that is difficult for students to access immediately.
And Susie, what's the LVMH Prize to you? Is it a kind of indicator?
Well, for me, I guess going into it as sort of what they call the experts, although I actually don't like that name. It makes it sound like a little bit.
It's the official name. But
Yeah, I know, it's the official name. I would say like a community that contributes, like, it's almost like their advice to like the designers. For me, it's obviously, I know most designers that have gone into like that first selection, so it's really just about going in there and then finding more about their work, and then seeing who's right creatively, business-wise, to go into that final stage for the main LVMH jury. But it's a great litmus test of the state of fashion. Each year is so different, and it reflects like not just aesthetic trends but also kind of general movements, I think, in fashion. I think over the years you kind of really see that, like whether it's like a minimal thing, whether it's a sustainable thing, whether it's like a more globalized thing. The LVMH Prize, I think it's like one of the, in fact, probably the only prize which gives you like a sort of good indication of where the new voices of fashion are going and what they're saying and what that says about the industry and the world beyond, I think.
Julie, you're nodding there. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've been a part of a lot of prizes, so I'm really familiar with how they work. And today I sit here and I think how important they are, because it's really difficult for talent to get started in and amongst all the noise. I think I'm not biased. This is a fact. I think the LVMH Prize is the most important prize because it's sort of a prize where it sounds like an advertisement, but this is really the case. It's where a prize where everybody wins. because you can, it's curated so that, you're really concentrating on talent versus commerciality. And it's a prize that anyone can participate around the globe. And it's also something that is not a heavy lift for a designer. It's an online application. So they don't have to work a lot, do big portfolios or anything like that. And then it gives them exposure if they make the short list, which is usually around 20 or so people. It gives them exposure to the most important people in fashion.
Yeah.
So relationship is everything, and you can. I think that a lot of people apply for prizes because to win. Well, that's just normal human nature. But actually, you should apply to a prize so that you can get the relationships. You have a chance for money and mentorship, but you really have exposure, because in today's day, we need a lot of curation, and the prize actually helps curate, what's, some of the great emerging talent out there. So whoever you are in fashion, you see this curated list is actually pretty spot on,
And like when they have that initial event to celebrate that, the 20 or so shortlisted designers in Paris, and all the industry key people are there, and all those conversations that happen between editors, buyers, and the designers. I think it's like unparalleled,
it's
really.
Helpful. It's really helpful, because the prize has been going on now for 6 years, so there is a little bit of historical data, and you can kind of look back. But the really great thing about it is that sometimes they get to meet their idols. Like all the designers up until this point got to meet Karl Lagerfeld. Like that's in a moment
monumental,
historical. Or Nicolas Ghesquière. I mean, the first year there was one designer that actually was, after the prize, laying down on the floor. Like, what's the matter? I met Nicolas Ghesquière and Karl Lagerfeld. They were just like too much to handle.
And they take a real interest.
Yeah.
When you see the interactions, it's not like this, like they're just passing through, like kind of ticking a box. They really take a deep interest.
No,
Remember the first prize,
the
second, I think, sorry, Fabio.
Sorry.
The second prize when Kanye came, and he actually stopped
At
in
every
every single booth,
yeah.
talked to the designer for an extensive amount of time, had a dialogue about fashion, and it was really interesting.
It's very democratic in that way, actually, that there's so many different incredible people and voices that just kind of cover this amazing breadth. So everyone's getting all these wonderful opinions and vantage points, and it just feels very inclusive in that sense.
Also, it represents a global design community. So much we're focused on certain cities or certain areas, but like this year there was a guy from Israel, Tel Aviv. I mean, how many designers do you know from Tel Aviv? Not that many. So it gives them that kind of exposure. Africa is definitely up and coming. There were 2 this year.
So getting to this kind of, I'm going to call it the golden circle of 20 finalists, there's so many people that apply. Is there a common thread? Is there any mistakes that you want to point out? Anything that you spot and you think that's the golden ticket? I noticed that in them. They're shotting into the 20.
I mean, first, as Julie mentioned, it's easy to apply, but still you have to be careful with the pictures you put online. So it takes maybe 2 hours, but you have to show good pictures. And we look a lot at the pictures. Then I would say it's important also to think it's not about when you apply. It's great if you have some visibility also before. What you do beside the application is very important, because in general we actually have already met these designers, we've seen them, we've been exposed through the press or directly in a showroom or with a show or presentation. So of course it's not only the application, it's where your brand is when you apply. And I think it's important also maybe not to apply too soon and not too late. There's always a window of opportunity in fashion, and you have to be at the right time. We are actually very careful when we think sometimes it's too soon. We won't put the person, the brand on the LVMH Prize, but we say, okay, let's keep him for next year because we want to protect them. We want to be also quite protective, and you know, it's important to find the right time. But sometimes, Paris Serre, she really had 2 collections, and she won the prize. So it can also be very quick. But she had already worked in 2 fashion brands, you know, so she had some experience.
I think that's really essential, that, isn't it? Because also a great part of the prize is the mentorship.
Thank you.
No, but I mean, it is. I mean, like, so therefore, you have to have something to. You have to have a base that can be mentored in that sense. So it doesn't matter how many seasons you've been in business, but it's on how consistent those seasons have been and how focused you are. And I think that's the real challenge and the real gamble. Sometimes, not necessarily the prize makes a mistake, because I think that, you know, the mistake is included in the philosophy of the prize. I think. I mean, like, the minute you start gambling, or the minute you start supporting any kind of young designer or artist, you have to also take into consideration that maybe it's not going to work out as you hoped it did. But the rate of success, though, has been really interesting to me. But I just wanted to just say a word about the finalists more than the ones that actually are the winners, because in fact they also get a level of mentorship no matter what by default.
Of course.
And so, that is a really, really interesting point. I think it's a really interesting opportunity in that sense.
Well, that's an important thing about all young talent, really, is that it's sort of our responsibility that if you're putting somebody in a short list and then there's the final list, that, you know, you're putting them in a very precarious position where, you know, everyone is looking at them. So it's really up to us to make sure they're okay. You know, especially the ones that don't go on to win. It's sort of, you never want to leave a young kid outside. It's sort of like you went through the process, you've met a lot of people, so now what's your next step? You know, and I will say that there's been some quite successful stories like Demna and Virgil. They were both finalists that didn't win. So it's really, 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 it's really the process.
Yes, it's been quite a lot.
Ian from Ambush.
Yes. But the other thing I'll say about the applicants is that we really work hard on quality. So you can show a lot of good pictures, and you have to have an essence of quality of make of your product or whatever you're doing, because that's really, really important, because you can't show them to these experts and not have well-made things.
Real honing
it's
of
really
craft.
important, and we see that in a lot of young designers where they've got great ideas, but their execution's not really up to snuff. You sort of have to have your execution sort of at a certain level.
That's what was good this year, actually. I mean, this year, what was really amazing, in the selection of designers, there was some real crafts.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's a trend,
It was
though.
absolutely amazing.
It was, there was a lot of like a
definitely
feel of the hand
Yes.
and like a sort of focus back on things that feel like more tactile, which I really, really liked.
But that's the essence
one
of the
like
prize.
you were saying, you know, it's showing also where fashion is going. And
Exactly. It's like a sort of counter movement to, let's say, like the streetwear, like the year that
digital,
Virgil was in the prize. So it's like that sort of counter movement to that.
We had, and also to the first year, we had Bruno Peters, who was in the short list, who completely did a fully transparent
Was that with
collections.
Honest Buy?
Yes, Honest Buy, zero waste. And he was the odd man out in a way. I mean, he was a talented.
He was ahead of his time.
So ahead of his time, talented guy, but who knew? And then this time, half of the finalists have really deep roots in responsibility of production or responsibility of.
I feel like they all spoke about it. It was so crazy how the language of how the shortlist designers.
But it's reflection of this new young generation coming up. For
Social
sure.
commentary this year, I think.
It was
A lot of social commentary.
Whereas the first year, Shane Oliver from Hood by Air was sort of an anomaly. You know, here's this guy, and he's got swag, and he's African American, and he's like doing this streetwear, but it's also luxury, and it's like, who's that? You know, so and
gender neutral also.
Yes,
it was a lot about
the
gender neutrality, and now it's just, you know, it's there, gender neutrality. They don't need to fight for it anymore. So now they're fighting for other things.
Yeah.
Well, it's such an integral part of Boudéa and what they do. They don't even need to really tell you about it. It's the narrative is more sophisticated than that, which is really good, both on what is sustainability defined and what is gender neutral. I mean, I think there was a total genuinity in the way the work was put forward, and in the designers representing that fashion.
That's another good word, is sophistication. There has to be sort of an element of sophistication, whatever you're doing, whatever you're expressing. That's kind of been a curatorial thing.
I mean, it went from transcendental haute couture, you know, to like, you know, it was that, you know, that divine Carole Hu. I mean, she was amazing.
Yeah. But as you say, the common thread is, you know, it's the quality and the creativity. But then after it can be a different kind of price or different, you know, style.
Well, it's also interesting too, the different, like even with Caroline Hu, that, you know, it was really hard to find talent from China when it first started. It was hard.
Yeah. And now it's
Africa. We had some Africans, but it was of a different ilk. So you can kind of see, and there was a moment where there were a lot of talent coming out of
South Korea. You had South Korea,
Ukraine.
Ukraine.
At the beginning.
I find those sort of different waves very interesting. Yes. They're kind of like reflection on like where different scenes are like coming up and rising, and
and this year definitely, and we have 2 Africans. So it's very quite noticeable that they are in the final.
The other thing is they're making their own textiles too, which is really interesting. A lot of them are really into that part of it, whereas in the beginning there's not so much. It was more the traditional way of buying your fabric and, you know, making it.
I want to know, actually, in the scouting process, is there sort of, let's say, like a diplomatic responsibility on LVMH's part to ensure that all regions are like represented, or, you know, or like it's like a global outlook?
Well, I mean, I think it's, we care about the regions. We try to really not have everybody coming from the same region, obviously. So, but of course, the first criteria is the you know, what we say, the work and all that. But it's true, we try to find a balance. But sometimes, you know, we don't find in the candidates a representation of all the region, and then, you know, it's like that. And we think, okay, next year we'll have. So at the beginning, early on, we had Africans, and then we couldn't find one who had who met the criteria as of notably really equality. And then this year, it's really great to have 2 who are really very impressive.
You have to look at, because we're all so familiar with the usual, you know, we know. So you have to give the people that are not in the mainstream a little bit more attention. And you also have to find out, you know, because it's very easy now to portray yourself as being kind of amazing. You have to dig a little deeper.
I always feel for, like, you know, when they're in that room, in that sort of showroom setup, I always find, like, maybe at the beginning years, not so much this year, because I feel like everyone just sort of came from so many different places, but, you know, with the differing kind of levels, there are like sometimes shortlisted designers that are like quite established in amongst press and buyers, and, you know, they already show at London Fashion Week or whatever, and then there were the ones that were like maybe coming from countries like, you know, Korea or Japan, that were like sort of a little bit like, I mean, it just seemed very daunting for them, and it's sort of a reflection, I guess, of the oftentimes like kind of quite different levels of designers that come into that shortlist.
And I think that's really wanted, you know, not for people to think it's only if you're young and you have 2 collections, or, you know, if you have 10 collections, forget about it. So it's really wanted not to have a mix, and so everybody feels they can apply.
But also
And you can also, hold your thought, but you can also, the thing that's actually super unique about it is you can apply again and again and again. There's no rules.
Yeah,
You can apply 10
people don't know
times.
you've applied, so you're not a loser, you know.
Yeah, you never.
Invisible application.
Invisible application.
I was commenting on. I wanted to comment on the fact that you have some that have great visibility, and they're already almost semi-established names, and then you have some that you don't at all. You don't know at all who they are if you don't
that's
really.
why it's great.
I think that in fact. That's amazing on both ways. It's amazing for those designers, because they benefit from the effect of surprise in a way, because we all love discovering talent, we all love discovering new things, and it's amazing to be there in a position where suddenly you see this person that comes from a country that of course you haven't really followed that much, or maybe you heard the name very vaguely, But there's one of the finalists actually, was in London with the international showcase. And that was just a presentation of designers coming from all over the world. And then suddenly that person is at the LVMH Prize in exactly the same season. That's like an incredible ascent, And I think it affects sometimes the judgment in a way that is positive, which obviously you look at the quality, you look at what they do, but you also discover people out there. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is a broadening of horizons, I think.
Not necessarily you want always the same names. I think it's really important to give space to actually names that not necessarily are the ones that are in the limelight immediately.
Well, and two, you see these designers, everything happens so fast. Look how much attention's being looked at the school pre-graduate level.
Well.
You have this conversation about graduates, and you're like, oh my gosh, they don't even have a business yet. So I think that we start the conversation early, so as a designer's already had like 2 or 3 seasons, they seem familiar. Whereas in the past, 2 or 3 seasons, you were just getting started. You'll be lucky if any, big store can carry you. Now it's sort of like you can. So it's interesting. That whole thing is changing as well.
Yeah, and I guess there is a sort of slight danger in almost over-encouraging them and the business, or encouraging them towards directions of setting up a brand when they're not quite ready.
I think it's also about maybe encouraging designers to understand different, or to trust different forms of business.
Yeah.
Or, not necessarily we are in a world now where everyone needs to follow the same trail. I think that, to me, that's really alarming.
Yeah.
So I think that if somebody just has the potential or the capacity to do 10 dresses a season, and they are at the cost of folly because it takes hours and hours and hours to make.
Yeah.
But then that is the business. And so not necessarily that person needs to produce hundreds.
Yeah.
So, I like to find to also encourage different formats, because otherwise it's
that's so important.
a very difficult future for quite a lot.
And also too, there is that person that's doing that, so you can't force them into a system that's been in the past.
Absolutely not.
And it's sort of up to them to create a new system. It's up for us to try not to force them into the old system, but to encourage them and support them as they go through into what's going to be a new system, because the system as it exists will limit some of these creative ideas that, and who's to say that you have to be super successful after 3 or 4 seasons? We also have to allow for these people maybe that need a little bit of time of maturity.
What is success for them?
Exactly.
Well, you have to determine success, first of all. That's a question that, from school already. It's pretty hard to sort of induce that. Yeah, but you have to determine what success is for you, first of all. What makes you successful.
So with the prize now, with the finalists we've got, what kind of support and what kind of system are they in? What phase are they in now?
With the current prize?
Yes, with the current prize.
Okay. Well,
Just talking about kind of
they are
support and
moving from shortlist to final.
They're getting nervous.
They're getting
about
nervous.
presenting.
It's delayed to September. They have a bit more time.
Yeah, they have more time. I just met Kenneth downstairs.
procrastination.
I'm happy.
They've got the summer to mull it
I have
over.
more time
they
to
have more
think
time
about it.
But just following on
To
from
do
what
some
we've been
yoga
saying.
and meditation, because I think that's what they need to prepare to see these creative directors, which, as you say, are their idols, and it can be very stressful.
Yeah.
I think we really try to make the ride easy and smooth. We pay for everything. We arrange transportation, hotels, and
Visas.
Amazing.
and so we really, on the practical side, it's easy for them. But of course, what's complicated is really to be in front of this jury, which is very impressive. So my advice is always like really, train yourself to be able to say like it's a pitch in reality, to say in a short time, to show who you are, what your brand says. It has to be unique. It has to be different, and you have to convince these people. They are of course really nice. They don't, they really are supportive and listen to the designer. But the stress is just to be in front of them and to pitch in a short time.
Which is actually in the learning process. I mean, it's good that they have some more time this time, but in the learning process, everyone has to do that. You have to be able to talk about your brand in a short amount of time, or if even the word brand, even if it's your collection or whatever you want to call it. It's a tough exercise, but it's a good one. It's like you kind of have to face it, because somewhere along the line you're going to have to do that, and you're in a safe environment. There's no one going to hurt you or bring you down.
Normally, you had a good training at the the semi-finalist.
Okay, so this training earlier on.
Yeah, no, but you're exposed to more than 60 experts that are going to ask you to tell quickly about your brand.
Yeah.
About whether you're 10 dresses
So,
or a brand
so
or-
they get a like live training during
They're there
the
for 2 days
semi-finals.
with all these experts coming to them asking them
In like
endless
quick
questions.
succession.
I think that's pretty good training.
But
Yeah,
also
very good
sometimes I
training.
have to choose, because they are speaking to Karl Lagerfeld, and then Nicolas Guesquier arrives, and you go, okay, who?
And also, too, what's really funny is that the ones that aren't in the in the system, if they're not from London or New York or someplace like that, they don't know who they're talking to. I'm always saying, just ask, introduce yourself and ask them who they are,
Yeah.
so that you know.
Because some of the experts are journalists, they are, from the industry, or they are creative people. It's really large, the experts, So, of course, what you say to an expert depends of who he is and what he does. So it's very important that
Yeah.
they understand, that they have Anna Wintour in front of them, or
Well, I bet
that
everyone-
they organize it.
It's almost the school of LVMH Prize then, because there's so much training that goes into it that a lot of designers don't necessarily have. I mean, you might be able to speak on this, Fabio, but often the business side of fashion people struggle with, or figuring out who they want to be they struggle with, or indeed that press scrum at the back everyone struggles with. So it's kind of remarkable to have this training, which is why it's so incredible for finalists as well as prize winners. But do you...
We do a kind of similar approach.
Yes.
We have a similar approach in a way that, for us, especially on the masters, students need to present their work all the time. So it's about being able to talk about your work, being able to sustain the work. You need to defend the work. There's a panel that is really daunting behind the big desk that give you critique. Critique is never an easy thing to receive, and you need to be able to confront that and still put your point across. So. I think that's a real. It's really.
But the CSM student are well trained, but sometimes we have students, fashion designers
That's what
who
I'm
come
saying.
from like India.
No.
Yes.
And they are not trained to that exercise.
But I should hope that the work still stands up for themselves, because you can be a good orator or you can be a good presenter, but that's not I don't know if that should be the criteria.
Absolutely. No. The criteria is that you have work that speaks for itself, and you are able to talk about it. Just talk about it. That's chit-chatting about fashion. That's absolutely relevant.
But
At that point.
we've all seen designers
One cup
that
of coffee,
aren't
yes.
articulate, and that's actually something.
Or if there's a language barrier, for
The
instance.
language barrier is, my advice to anyone that's applying, make sure your English is really good. Because
you have a good translator, because this year Dublet won, and
Yes.
It's true, because it's a hard fact, but that's actually something. A common language is actually good if you're thinking about doing a global business. You know, it's helpful. It's really helpful, and you can see where it's been a detriment to some people in the past, especially even when you apply the translation of things, and it's really important. That and being able to articulate, find your voice. It's never really was a criteria in the past, but now it kind of is. You have to have a voice, and you have to be able to express it. That's something you can learn. You know, talent's something that you have. You can actually learn to be expressive and have a voice. You know, that's one thing I think the school should really concentrate more on, is being able to teach the kids to be able to express themselves.
Yes, you can, of course you can, but I think that they also need to find a way of using whatever is a problem for them, or whatever are their inabilities. Say you're very shy, then maybe very shy can be a tool.
Exactly.
And so, you know, I mean, I think that's, I get really overwhelmed when I have somebody really, really confident in front of me explaining everything really well, because it makes me like get really bored from the word go. I actually, I love when you just meet people that sort of, and sometimes you need to make more effort and ask them more questions, but one thing about the finalists, well, the semi-finalists, when you see all these designers, in fact, I don't think you actually meet designers that are actually not confident about talking their work. About their work, they just have a way of talking about their work, and sometimes it's a bit more difficult because of the language. But say that they would have a translator, I would find that very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Personally, and so it depends on, you know, it's really, really good to sort of like see.
I like the socially awkward ones.
We all do. We all do.
This year there was this
when they're not hardcore.
I'm more suspicious when they're overly confident.
You know, at the gala night, there was this absolutely incredible moment this year when Naomi Campbell was interviewing the finalists, and at some point there was Eftihia from Greece, who was one of our alumni. And you know, she has she's a bit awkward in many ways, because she's a very shy person. But and it was fantastic to see to be there listening to that conversation. I mean, it was absolutely
surreal.
Fantastic. It was beautiful.
Those are the magic moments.
Well, it was. I mean, you could see that Eftihia was actually enjoying it, and so was actually Naomi. So it was actually really good.
There was another funny moment when Caroline Hugh, she looks like she's 12, and she has these like big glasses on, and she, I think, dropped her glasses in Sydney. She was speaking to Sydney Toledano, who heads up all of the fashion group at LVMH, and he picked them up and he put them on. And there she is looking at him, blinded. He's got these big glasses on. So there's moments like that are good.
I want to talk a little bit about the final moments, the big cash prize, and kind of what designers do to it, and what advice we can give for designers, because often I think there's quite a lot of pressure that comes with being a winner of the LVMH Prize, and also that money is quite a lot of money. Susie, what do you see in a finalist? What's a key aspect of a finalist for you?
It's so difficult because they've all been so different as well, and like I think each they won the prize for very, very different reasons, and their level of businesses are also like quite different. The success rate has been safe for one, generally
pretty amazing.
Great. Think what they do with the money is pretty key, but I think they've all done very different. I don't know the ins and outs of what they've all done with the money, but they've all done very different things with that money in order to get to like another level. But I think there is a bit of a danger in maybe expecting everything and too much from the winners, because yes, it is an amazing prize, but as money goes in the scope of a business, it's like a drop in the ocean. Really,
That's what
you know,
Marcus made
it can just go just like that on like two shows, and okay, that's it. Like that's like a season.
2 employees.
Yeah, 2 employees. But you know, are they the type of designers that can make those 2 employees count, or those 2 shows or show and a half count, and get their brand to another level? I think by and large,
I think it's exactly that.
the case.
You know, it's really like what you do with your money. It really depends on who you are, where you're at, and I agree. There's no path, textbook to succeed in fashion. And then, as you say, sometimes succeed is maybe it's just to stay and to continue to be in a niche. Maybe I don't like that word, but to be very avant-garde and not try to develop too much. So that's why actually the mentoring we do is very tailored to the need of the brand, and they do very different things with the money. I mean, mostly I must say it's a lot about either the team or the visibility, maybe a choice around that, but sometimes it's also about the organization, getting the contracts right, things like that,
Managing the business side.
Yes, it can be very diverse, and it really depends. And we really adapt to who we have, what the needs they have, because as you say, they've been very different and at very different stages. So there's nothing already written that I could say, oh, let's do that. I mean, of course, like advice I must say about protecting your brand in terms of registering it before you if you are shortlisted or in any prize, so before your name is exposed officially on the web through an institution or a prize, you should register your brand in the most important countries, because sometimes people do it for you, which is kind of against you, and then after they want to resell the brand to you, and that can cause really big problems afterwards.
I mean, that's amazing advice. It's also expensive to do.
I know.
So that's, that's one of the advantages of applying for prizes. It's just money to do some of these things that you need to do but can't do.
So one thing I advise systematically when they win and with the money they have is really to protect their brand in a few countries. You don't need to protect everywhere, but of course in some countries. But it's interesting, really exciting to see how diverse their needs have been after mentoring more than 10.
Everyone kind of takes it in their own way. So I think,
one thing that they always ask me is finance. To help them on finance, a business plan, a budget.
It's the most daunting, isn't it?
That's the one that we're really scared of. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and many more we could be covering. But so far we've kind of touched on that this feels like a bit of a holy grail of prizes. Amazing mentoring. Not only does it spotlight some amazing designers, but we also have a kind of cultural map of what's happening, a social commentary, trend forecasting even. Is this the holy grail of prizes? Is this the behemoth?
I mean, it's the biggie.
It's the biggie.
Maybe now.
Maybe now.
I mean, we can only deal with that, but I think we can say that.
Yeah?
I think it depends, who you are, but it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Yeah.
And also you were asking earlier about the downside. It's so funny, we always try to think of the downside, but there is no downside. So why should we try to analyze it and say, well, yes, there's a downside, but really there's not. I mean, there's a little bit of luck and destiny in it too. It's not a formula. You can't work really hard and make it happen, but there's a little bit of the unknown there too, but there's not a downside.
It's been such a game changer, I think, to, let's say, that young designer, anyone who's coming up, like either coming up through school or just graduated. It has been, I don't know, let's say now it's become more of a goal to attain, and maybe that in itself maybe creates like a little bit like high expectations. You know, if they don't get there, then designers maybe like question themselves in a different way. But I think as an overall thing to try for, you know,
Well, you need to have
it's unparalleled. You know, it gives. I think it has given young designers an extra bit of drive.
I will say that there are some designers that applied and didn't get into the short list that have actually done really well too. So I think you have to be fearless in these things. You have to just keep trying to apply for what you can apply, keep trying to put yourself in the right places. And you know, you can fail a lot, but it's not really a failure, it's just really part of learning. And when you're young, it's you can take more risks in a way.
And it's not the only prize.
Yes,
First
there's
of all,
lots
it's
of
not
good
a
ones.
prize, but
There's
it is a very big prize, and it is a prize that really validates you, whether you get selected or not. I mean, it's something that you should be fearless, and regardless, it's always a bad selection, no matter what. I mean, like, you know, you can't sort of expect that. You know, if a prize is open to so many designers, then obviously there will be a choice, and maybe some will be left out. I mean, there's been some great finalists that were not the winners. I mean, you know, I'm like some really incredible names, I would say. So there's been quite a lot of people that were missed out. But at the same time, they were not missed out. They were the finalists, and that's where you actually. That's where you actually win. But you also need to be in a position where you trust yourself to apply to a prize like that. And for the students also, I mean, that's you know, I encourage all the graduates to apply to it, because no matter what, you need to be part of the race.
It's a cliche, but it's not the winning, it is taking part.
It's important. It's very important. Otherwise, it means that you don't have the confidence in what you do, and you really. And this is a mega prize, and therefore you need to put yourself forward for it.
You can't lose.
No, it's a win-win.
It's a win-win.
I don't think it should even be part of your thinking, losing.
That's a nice note to end on, I think. Don't let losing be part of your thinking. And thank you guys so much for taking part. It's wonderful to pick your brains on the topic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.